Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking some seriously fascinating ancient texts from the Book of Wisdom, Paul's letter to the Romans, and the Gospel of Matthew. We're going to dive deep into the profound mystery of divine justice and tackle one of the oldest, most stubborn questions in human history. Why do good and evil coexist in our world? Look, if you've ever looked around at the absolute messiness of life and wondered why things are the way they are, well, these texts offer a striking, highly structured perspective that we're going to break down for you right now. It really is the ultimate human question, isn't it? The classic problem of evil. Basically, if a powerful God is actually in charge, why is the world still full of weeds? To understand how these specific texts answer that, we kind of have to completely rethink our very definition of power. You see, we typically associate power with immediate action, swift justice, forceful control over our surroundings. But as we're going to see, these sources paint a completely different picture of what it means to be truly strong. Section 1. The Paradox of True Power. Okay, so the Book of Wisdom brilliantly illustrates this core thesis. We usually picture worldly power as immediate punishment, right? Swift destruction, wiping out the opposition the very second it appears. But divine power? It's characterized by clemency, immense lenience, and essentially permitting time for repentance. The text literally says, your mastery over all things makes you lenient to all. It's a total paradigm shift. True mastery actually results in extreme leniency. It gives people the time they need to change their ways, proving that those who are just must also be kind. Section 2. Help in our weakness. Now, of course, living in a flawed world during this messy, lenient waiting period, it can be incredibly frustrating. It's exhausting. And that is exactly why Paul's letter to the Romans empathetically points out our human limitations. He writes, the Spirit comes to the aid of our weakness. The Spirit himself intercedes with inexpressible groanings. When we're weak, when we're just exhausted by the weeds all around us and don't even know how to pray, the text tells us we aren't just left alone to figure it out. The Spirit steps in, searching our hearts and interceding for us. It's this really profound acknowledgement of the everyday struggle of living in an imperfect world while we wait on divine timing. Section 3. The Wheat and the Weeds. To help visualize this exact waiting period, the Gospel of Matthew offers this brilliant agrarian parable from Jesus. Picture this. First, a householder sows good wheat seed in his field. But then, while everyone is fast asleep, an enemy sneaks in and sows weeds right on top of the wheats. So, when the crop grows, boom, the weeds appear too. Naturally, the slaves are pretty upset and impatient. They offer to go pull up all the weeds immediately. But the master commands them to wait until the harvest. Instead of aggressively ripping out the weeds and risking the accidental destruction of the good wheat alongside them, the master chooses patience. He lets both grow together until the very end. It's that exact same divine leniency we saw in the Book of Wisdom, just played out in a farmer's field. Section 4. Decoding the Parables. Now, the crucial point here is that this isn't just some simple story about ancient farming practices. Jesus actually pulls his disciples aside later to give them the exact cipher for this metaphor. He lays the hidden message out perfectly. The sower of the good seed is the Son of Man. The field, that represents the whole world. The good seed represents the children of the kingdom, while the weeds are the children of the evil one. And finally, the enemy who sowed them is the devil. When you look at it this way, the master's decision to wait makes total sense on a global scale. The weeds are allowed to exist for a time alongside the wheat, not because the master lacks the power to stop them, but because uprooting the evil prematurely would just cause way too much collateral damage to the good. Section 5. Small beginnings, massive impact. So, how exactly does this kingdom of heaven manage to grow and thrive when it's surrounded by all these weeds? Jesus answers this by firing off two more quick metaphors. First, he compares the kingdom of heaven to a tiny mustard seed. It starts as the absolute smallest of seeds, yet when it's full grown, it becomes this massive bush where birds can come and dwell. Then he compares it to a tiny pinch of yeast that a woman mixes into 3 whole measures of wheat flour, until eventually the entire batch is leavened. If we look closely at these two parables, we see some super fascinating parallels. Both the mustard seed and the yeast start out incredibly small, literally almost invisible to the naked eye. And here is a wild historical detail. In the ancient world, mustard was actually considered a rapidly spreading invasive weed. Jesus is ironically comparing the kingdom of heaven to a weed that just takes over the whole garden. Both the seed and the yeast work quietly beneath the surface. Yet despite being hidden, they both result in a massive, total, and completely unstoppable transformation of their environment. They even end up providing for others, like those branches sheltering the birds. It brilliantly shows us that the kingdom of heaven doesn't arrive with some loud, destructive show of worldly force, but through quiet, expansive, continuous growth. And it's worth noting that Jesus deliberately chose this specific teaching method. The text tells us he spoke to the crowds only in parables to fulfill ancient prophecy. I will open my mouth in parables, I will announce what has lain hidden from the foundation of the world. He basically took the deepest, most hidden secrets of divine justice, the actual architecture of how God interacts with the world, and made them accessible to everyday people through highly relatable stories about farming and baking bread. Section 6. The Final Harvest. Because, as you might expect, this period of growing alongside the weeds doesn't last forever. It all builds up to an ultimate, definitive resolution. The harvest represents the end of the age. According to the text, this is the moment when justice is finally executed by the angels. The weeds, defined here as all who cause others to sin and all evildoers, are collected and thrown into the fiery furnace. But the wheat, the righteous, will finally shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. So this period of leniency does have an expiration date. Divine patience eventually gives way to perfect, separating justice. Which brings us to a really compelling final thought. If true divine power is defined by patience and clemency, how can you practice lenience with the weeds in your own life today? Jesus ends his explanation by saying, "Whoever has ears ought to hear." He's directly challenging us. While we wait for that final harvest in a messy, imperfect world, how might we mirror this divine patience in our own daily interactions? It's a profound thought to carry with you as you navigate the wheat and the weeds in your own life. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.